The Gambling Goon, a Findom short story. Eddie had always been a loser. He was not the kind of loser people rallied around, like in those feel-good movies, where he'd take off his glasses and turn into a handsome fella. No one was writing a heartwarming script about him. No. Eddie was the sort of loser who got bullied by girls he was hopelessly in love with, and the girls who had no idea he existed. Or if they did, they had treated him like an unpaid intern in the business of their amusement. It was impressive, really. A universal level of rejection. His grandmother, who raised him, bless her heart, spent his childhood loudly proclaiming that Eddie was special, which, in hindsight, probably made things worse. It's hard to argue you're not a weirdo when your only hype woman is knitting jumpers with your name on them. As an adult, Eddie had achieved the rare feat of staying exactly the same. He was still a loser, but now he was a grown-up loser, which felt like an even bigger failure. He worked as a cashier at a supermarket where people barely acknowledged his existence. He was essentially part of the furniture, like the squeaky trolley wheels or that one aisle where always smells like spilt milk. He didn't live with his grandmother anymore, but he still visited her regularly at her house, which reeked of old lady perfume and tuna sandwiches, as if the very walls had been seasoned over the decades. It wasn't comforting exactly, but it was familiar, and that was almost the same thing. Eddie was in his 30s now, and still, somehow, a virgin. He'd gone on a few dates, but his natural charisma, or lack thereof, had a way of making women recoil like they'd touched a live wire. It wasn't the shy, I'm nervous kind of rejection. No, this was more of a full-body wince that told Eddie everything he needed to know. As the years passed, he became comfortable with this, like a man who'd been trapped in a room for too long and started to believe the walls were his friends. Then one sleepless night, the kind of night where time doesn't exist and scrolling through social media feels like a personal quest for meaning, Eddie discovered financial domination. At first, it seemed a bit absurd, a bit out there. But then he thought, hang on, this is perfect. Now, Eddie was never brave enough, nor rich enough, to send actual money to these women, but that didn't stop him from, well, let's just say his laptop screen had seen way more action than his love life. Those beautiful women in their photos and posts were the only things that gave him satisfaction and a sense of purpose. If you can call feeling humiliated by a stranger on the internet purpose. True, the posts weren't aimed at him, but that didn't matter. Gooning became his second nature. It was like life itself had decided, you're not the main character here. He never was. Eddie was like a background extra in an adult film where even the extras forget was there. Every week, Eddie played the lottery, but not because he had any grand illusions about winning. Hope was far too optimistic for someone like Eddie. It was more of a ritual, like brushing your teeth or pretending to care when someone talks about their holiday. It was just something to do. Logically, a little spice in a life otherwise about as thrilling as a spreadsheet. A quick scratch here, a meaningless number there. It was the closest thing Eddie had to a hobby. And even then, it was a stretch to call it that. And then one day, Eddie won the lottery. The actual lottery. The one people talk about, dream about, but never think will happen to them. Eddie stared at the ticket as if it had just insulted his grandmother. He couldn't believe it. Didn't want to believe it. He wasn't built for this sort of thing. Luck wasn't something he'd ever had to deal with before. Overwhelmed, he did what any sensible person would do in his position. Absolutely nothing. He didn't tell a soul. What would he even say? Hey, remember me? The guy no one remembers? Yeah, well, now I'm rich, and I still don't know what I'm doing. No, this was uncharted territory, and Eddie wasn't ready to chart it. And then it hit him, like a ton of bricks wrapped in bad decisions. He'd been gooning over Mistress Mature for months. Mistress Mature. This was it. His moment. The chance to finally prove he wasn't just some nobody. He could be somebody. Somebody who paid a stranger on the internet to humiliate him, sure, but somebody nonetheless. He started small, 100. Not enough to make a dent, but enough to make a statement. A bold opening act. Then a message pinged back. Good boy, she wrote. 2 little words, but they hit Eddie like poetry. Shakespeare had nothing on this. He was a good boy. For the first time in his life, someone noticed him. It felt dangerous, and he liked it. At first, Eddie kept things modest. He had what you'd call a classic poor person mentality. Never splash out too much, always keep one eye on the pennies, even when the pounds are practically falling from the sky. So he stuck to small tributes. $100 here, $200 there. The occasional coffee or perfume from Mistress Mature's wish list. Just little token to let her know he was serious, but, not too serious. But then the weeks rolled on, and something started to shift. Eddie looked at his bank account one day and had a revelation. Hang on, I've got loads of money. It was like discovering a cheat code for life. Suddenly those modest tributes felt a bit, embarrassing. Amateur. No, this was a time for boldness. The tributes got bigger. The wishlist gifts turned into luxury handbags, and Eddie was throwing money around like he'd just invented capitalism. The kind of spending that would make his nan weep into her tuna sandwiches. Mistress Mature knew how to make Eddie feel like the king of the losers. Good boy, she'd purr, and his heart would leap. She embraced him in ways he didn't think possible. Well, not physically, obviously, but in his mind it was practically a cuddle. He felt a connection with her he'd never experienced before. Except maybe with his nan. Thousands flew out of his account faster than you could say, wait, how much? But it didn't matter. He was her good boy, and there wasn't a receipt in the world that could measure the value of that. Eddie, in his usual style, became a little clingy. He wasn't exactly sending "I miss you" texts at 3 a.m., but he was definitely sending "Hey, you still there?" messages at a rate that even a spam bot would have called excessive. He wanted more. More words, more attention, more something. So he did what any sensible person would do. He asked Mistress Mature for a phone call. And she said, "Sure, I'll chat with you for $10,000. $10,000 for a phone call. Now, Eddie had won the lottery, sure. But he hadn't won anything else in life. So when she said $10,000, Eddie had this brief moment of thinking, is this a scam? Or is this actually the best deal in the world? And then, without a second thought, he did it. Because why not? He had money. Saturday, the most sacred of days. For Eddie, this meant a shift at the supermarket that dragged on for 8 hours but felt like 12. By the time he got home, he was a mix of exhaustion and excitement. A man living 2 lives. one as an invisible cog in the grocery store machine, the other as a top-tier simp preparing for the most important call of his life. He tidied up his flat. Not because Mistress Mature would ever know. She wasn't going to teleport in and judge him for the crumbs on his sofa. But it felt symbolic. A fresh start. Everything had to be perfect. His essentials were laid out on the desk like some sort of bizarre ritual. Credit card gleaming under the lamplight. Lotion uncapped, tissues stacked like he was preparing for the world's saddest magic trick. He sat down, cracked his knuckles, and opened Telegram. This was it. His heart was racing and he didn't know why. After all, he was paying her 10 grand. She had to like him. Eddie's hands trembled as he dialed, the numbers on his phone blurring slightly, as if they too were in on the tension. The familiar Telegram ringtone started, that cheery little tune mocking the utter chaos in his chest. And then, click. Mistress Mature answered, but instead of the seductive purr of her voice, Eddie was met with chaos. "Ah, hang on! Oh, bugger, what's this?" came the unmistakable sound of someone fiddling with their phone. The screen flickered, and suddenly, probably by accident, the camera was on. Eddie blinked as the view tilted wildly, a grainy whirlwind of curtains, floral wallpaper, and a teapot cozy that seemed strangely familiar. The phone swerved again, briefly capturing what looked like a stack of crossword puzzle books, then settled on a figure Eddie knew better than he knew himself. There she was, standing in her living room, holding the phone at an angle so low it was basically pointed at her chin. Mistress Mature. No, not Mistress Mature. Nan. Eddie froze, his entire brain short-circuiting as he stared at the screen. Grandma! Nan squinted at her phone, like it might reveal an explanation. Eddie? What are you doing here? What am I doing here? What are you doing here? Are you Mistress Mature? Nan's face went pale, and for the first time in Eddie's life, he saw his grandmother speechless. Eddie felt a strange mix of shame, anger, and, if he was honest, a bit of admiration. His gran had pulled off the ultimate scam, and he'd fallen for it hook, line, and wallet. But maybe that was the point. You don't need to throw money at strangers for validation when your biggest fan is right there sipping tea and plotting financial domination from her armchair. In the end, love isn't about money. Except apparently, in his Nan's case, because she definitely wasn't giving any of it back.